Oh, we're going.
Oh,
now.
there we go.
Oh. Okay,
Thank you, Tammy.
great. Thank you, Tammy. I'm gonna, oh, are we ready? Are we on then now? Okay. I'm going to call this meeting of the Climate Action Plan Committee of the Salem City Council to order. President are Bennett,
Hoy,
Phillips.
and Gonzalez. Okay, very good. And staff to be identified. Okay, we're going to, you've received public comment. How many public comments do we have, Heather?
Correct. Yes, we received one public comment yesterday before 5 p.m. from Lori Doherty, affiliated with Salem 350. And I sent that your way.
Thank you. Okay. Why don't we begin then with the overview of the Climate Action Plan? By the way, very impressive document. It really is huge.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so as I was chatting with the mayor before we started, we do have a PowerPoint presentation to get us started through these first two discussion items. Patricia Farrell's going to get us started to kind of go through, walk us back through some background of the plan itself. We did decide it's probably a good idea to break up and we'll stop sharing our screen every so often so that we can just check in with folks and see if there's any questions. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started.
Good afternoon, everybody. Patricia Farrell, former Climate Action Plan Manager, but now that's turned over to Heather's capable hands. But I'm just going to go through some of the background, as Heather said, just to refresh everyone's memory or to give you some new information if you haven't been following the whole process in the past. So next slide, Heather. So the work on the Climate Action Plan actually began quite a few years ago. In 2017, the strategic plan mentioned the desire of council to have a climate action plan developed. As part of that, the greenhouse gas inventory was done in 2019. And then following that, we actually did a climate action audit to look at things that the city is already doing to address climate change that we could roll into a climate action plan. So that was done in 2020. Beginning of 2020. And then we hired a consultant to begin work on the plan. And in October of 2020, council set two goals, which I'll talk about in a second. But those two goals form the framework for the climate action plan. And then in the future, or in the continuing desire, is to keep working on the action plan to sort of begin implementing it. And that has shown up in both the strategic plan and the council's policy agenda. Next slide. So the greenhouse gas inventory that I mentioned was conducted in 2019. It was based on 2016 data because that's what was available at the time. And there were two pieces of it that were analyzed. One is called the sector-based inventory, which is a narrower frame where it's what's emitted within the city limits. The other inventory is a much broader look, and it's called consumption-based. And that's based on, includes everything from manufacturing and shipping that incurs outside of the city limits, could occur globally. And so that is not, we looked at that, but that is not what we used for all the assessments and forecasts that we did in the climate action plan. So next slide. So this is a breakdown of the sector-based emissions. So these are the ones within the city limits. As you can see from this, transportation and electricity are the two biggest components of our greenhouse gas emissions. This is based on kind of old data now, 2016. Since that analysis was done, the electricity component has actually gotten smaller because PGE closed their Boardman coal plant. And so that has actually changed. But it gives you a sense kind of relative amount of emissions based on these different sectors. Stationary combustion refers to things such as natural gas, propane, and diesel. And then wastewater and waste are smaller components of the inventory. So next slide. So in the action audit that I mentioned, we looked at different actions that we've already done, recent actions that the city has undertaken to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We looked at other plans that other cities in Oregon and in the Northwest have done to get some sense of the types of strategies, the types of work that other consultants were doing. And then as another component of the plan was to come up with some recommendations for the climate action plan, which we have rolled forward into the actual plan itself. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, council set these two goals in October of 2020. And they're aggressive goals, but they are also fairly standard across other cities as well. So the first one is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 50% by 2035. And that's 50% of the 2019 inventory level. And then the other component is to become carbon neutral by 2050. And so both of those were used in our greenhouse gas forecasts and are referenced several times in the climate action plan. These kind of form the basis for future, for monitoring, for recording if we're making progress towards these, and also form the backbone for looking at the different forecasts that were in the plan itself. Okay, next slide.
Patricia, when do you want us to ask questions if we have any?
Actually, right now would be a great time to do that.
I had just a question, kind of understanding the sector-based emissions. You mentioned Boardman and its impact. In meeting our goals, how much of what will occurs sort of off-site like Boardman? Or do you see what I'm saying? I'm not sure I understand. Even on transportation, how much of that is transportation sector in Salem? How much of it is just occurring off-site where we may not have the same kind of control? I'm just not sure I understand that.
Right. So using the example of transportation is probably the easiest. So let's say you're driving your car from Eugene to Salem. So the emissions in the sector-based inventory, once you cross the city line in Salem, that's what's counted. All the other stuff that happened outside of the city limits is part of the other inventory. It's a little bit harder with electricity, the electric component, because it's generated in a different spot, but it's consumed within the city limits. So that's how that works. So there's kind of this line that's drawn around the city for the inventory.
Okay, Chris?
Thank you. Patricia, can you tell me of the 12 other cities that you looked at, do you recall how many of them use that same sector-based look at the emissions? Is that kind of a standard practice, or is that kind of the typical way to do it?
Yeah, that I don't have the exact number of cities, but that's the standard way it's done, because that's really what you have as a city, what you have purview, what you can possibly control.
Okay.
The control, I say. The other components, the consumption base is really more a matter of personal choice and personal decisions. And so it's common to use the sector-based as the baseline.
Thank you. And just one more question. Could you just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of our understanding, could you just tell us what you mean when you say carbon neutral?
So carbon neutral doesn't mean that you're not having emissions. It means that they're offset somehow, either through sequestration, which is a term meaning that carbon dioxide is stored somehow, or you're offset through carbon purchases, through like a carbon banking system, things like that. So it's a way to balance. It's a balancing act. It doesn't necessarily mean you have no emissions at all.
Thank you.
Yeah, Trevor.
Yeah, so I guess my question is pretty simple. What is transportation? Is it just cars? Is it industry? What does transportation mean? Like the top 2 or 3?
It's vehicles that have internal combustion engines that are burning gasoline.
So it's pretty intuitive. It is what it sounds like.
Yes, so it's well, trucks sometimes use diesel, so that might be in the other component.
Okay.
But if it's like a truck or a van or passenger vehicles, anything that's not in a fully electric vehicle is having greenhouse gas emissions based on transportation.
And Mr. Mayor, it looks like Jose's hand is up. If he's off, you have to look off the side to see his hand.
Okay, thank you. I
Thanks,
can't
Chris.
see his hand. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Mayor. Patricia, everybody's sort of helping me sort of get close to this answer. And Patricia, on the transportation, I know we talk about consumption, but how much, when you talk about a truck coming from Eugene to Salem, that's if a family comes and visits family here, that's one thing. But what if that truck is coming in to bring a product that's being consumed at the store? Do we have percentage? Did that transportation, I think early on in our first committee meetings, the climate action plan, someone gave a percentage of saying this is the amount of people amount of consumption that's driving this X amount of percentage in this transportation pie. Does that make sense, Patricia?
Yes, it does, because each one of those pieces of the wheel that I showed has a breakdown within it, and I don't have that at the tip of my fingers right at this moment, but I can look back through the document and see if I can find it. But yes, you're right. I mean, there's different within each of those. There's different breakdowns between personal vehicles, person or passenger, trucks, things like that. And I also want to add that I-5, the traffic going through on I-5 is not included in any of the inventory. The pass-through transportation.
No, thank you, Patricia. And 'cause I remember it being I don't want to add a figure, but I remember being a really high number. And someone said, well, we're not even going to talk about that category, which is consumption-based emissions, not us driving them around town. So it was such a high percentage, but I didn't know if you knew it. But okay, maybe we can get that number later.
Yes, I'll look for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other? Thank you.
Okay, so the climate action plan has 2 components to it. One is to have strategies that mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions, that lessen them, reduce them. The other component is to build resilience in the community for climate change impacts that we are currently facing and will face in the future, regardless, one way or another, of what we do. But of course, we're trying to reduce the impacts through the mitigation policies. So there's 2 pieces of it. And then also you will see in your document in Appendix 8 that has the full list of all the 183 strategies. Within that, there's different timelines that can help prioritize, and also list key partners. Some of the strategies are not under the purview of the city, that they're actually going to need to be led by other groups such as Chariots. So they are definitely a key partner, as is PGE and Northwest Natural Gas, for instance. So those groups we need to partner with for several of the strategies. So if you look in your Appendix 8 in your document, a lot of that information is there that will help lead the discussion on prioritization. Okay, next slide, Heather. So as Councilor Gonzalez remembers, we had a very large task force formed of many groups across the community. So we tried to get as many different voices included as possible. It was included different groups such as the public health sector, emergency management, Native Americans, food share. You can see the list there on the right. We had 6 different task force meetings. Each one of those was live streamed and recorded, and also had a concurrent public interface on the website for people to give us ideas and to give us feedback as we were working through the different pieces of the plan. Okay, next. So here are the pieces, and each one of these was a different meeting. So we started with visioning. What does a carbon neutral city look like? What are people's aspirations for being a resilient community? Then we had an assessment of our vulnerability to climate change, followed by strategy development. And then we had several, or a couple at least, on implementation planning and the strategy refinement. Went through several iterations of the final list of strategies. And then the final plan was presented to council in December of 2021 and was accepted by council in February of 2022. Next slide. So I just wanted to have this slide in there because the vulnerability assessment was an important component of the plan. And so through this, and it was using an Oregon State University, their climate department actually has a process for ranking. And these were the ones that came out that Salem is going to be vulnerable to. So both sides of the hydrology equation, we have potential for more floods, potential for more drought, definitely more extreme heat days, and extreme heat is defined as above 90 degrees. And then those can often then lead into more wildfires, which then affects air quality. And also we have potential for more extreme winter events. So there's a lot of potential impacts to the city, not just necessarily within the city limits, but feeling the effects from other places nearby. And then the other thing that we tried to keep in mind during the climate action plan was to make sure that we always keep in mind that climate change is not experienced equally. There's disproportionate impacts to people who, for instance, are living outside, who have to work outside, who don't have air conditioning. So we have experienced a lot of these conditions already in the last couple of years. Okay, next. And then this slide just shows, if we have these impacts, there's definite economic impacts. I mentioned people who have to work outside. If more people become sick because of bad air quality, it can impact the workforce. There's all these different then cascading impacts, infrastructure disruption, public health issues. We know when the fires happened in the Santiam Canyon, people needed to leave that area and have places to stay nearby. Energy grid capacity, we had issues with that during the ice storm. Obviously, our tourism and outdoor recreation suffered when we have lots of extreme heat days or smoke. So there's just a lot of different impacts that can cascade down from any one event. Okay, next slide. And then we looked at these different plans in Oregon because the question has come up, where is Salem? Are we the only ones doing a climate action plan? And no, all these different cities have done climate action plans. Some of them have been in place for years, and some, such as Milwaukee, are fairly recent to the list. So, but all of these different cities have action plans. And I think that might be the end of my piece. So are there any questions on those slides?
On that, yeah, sorry, Mayor, if I may, I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Patricia. On that prior slide that listed the cities, there was a color gradient. Was that just random? Okay,
Yes.
all right, thank you.
Okay.
All right. There we go. My turn. Okay. Great. So I think at this point, we would like to go ahead and take a closer look at the strategies that are within the plan, that Appendix 8 that Patricia mentioned. Of course, this is where the next steps and the decisions on implementation will need to be made. This list is pretty comprehensive. Again, 183 different strategies. So I think what we'd like to do next is just provide a pretty brief overview of how these strategies were selected, how they're organized, and then discuss some of the considerations that we might need to factor in as we weigh the next steps in this process. So again, first, just a quick reminder that there are two primary goals associated with the strategies in this plan. One of those being to decrease greenhouse gas emissions in Salem. And the second primary goal is to increase community resilience. So again, all of these strategies were informed by the public, by the community, by the 30+ member task force, as well as with feedback from the consultant Verdi Group. It's a pretty informed list. It's pretty comprehensive. These are the primary goals. That list of 183 is further broken out into 7 different categories or action areas seen on the left-hand side of the screen. Next to each of those, starting with materials and waste, you see the total count of strategies of that 183 that's assigned to each particular group. The largest of those is the transportation and land use group, 42 different strategies. And if you look just to the right of that, there's a little description. That category really is looking to positively impact public transit and other mobility options for the residents of Salem, including biking and walking. This is followed in count by those in the community and the energy categories. Community, of course, these are the activities designed to increase resiliency and equity building. Energy, those are designed to increase efficiency and renewable energy access to more folks. That's followed by materials and waste and natural resources with 24 each in those categories and 8 each in the economic development and food categories, looking to impact positively our economy and increase access to local food. And before I do move forward, I wanted to just point out, you'll see in that Appendix 8, I think it's important that for each of these 7 different categories in that plan, they did take the time to include an overall vision statement for that category, as well as a summary of guiding equity principles that is applicable to that subset. So each and every strategy in this plan is identified as having either a high, medium, or low greenhouse gas reduction potential, emissions reduction potential, a high to low cost to the city. Each identifies a lead agency as either being the city, that might be the transit, that might be our local utilities. Each provides a recommended timeline for implementation. That might be short-term now to within a couple years. That might be 3 to 5 years out, or that could be something that's recommended to wait 5 or more years. In addition to those I just mentioned, each strategy also contains a list of 1 or more separate co-benefits. You'll see the icons there on the right-hand side. They've identified 5 different co-benefits. These are extra benefits to the community that include public health, environmental quality, economy benefits, increased mobility, and community equity. So each one of those strategies in the plan touches on at least one of those extra co-benefits. So once again, 183 strategies. Where do we start with this? Staff took a stab at this and pulled together a list of recommended priority actions for early implementation. This is a smaller subset of 55 different strategies and includes actions from each of those 7 categories that I just spoke of. This list includes strategies with high to medium greenhouse gas reduction potential, and includes strategies where the city is primarily the lead agency. The cost to the city is deemed low. The work can begin relatively quickly, and multiple co-benefits to the community can be gleaned from those strategies. That's how these were selected. Additionally, these strategies provide an opportunity for the city to demonstrate leadership by example, will help to establish local climate action authority, and they will also begin to address issues of equity in the Salem community. One item of important, something to note is that almost half of these 55 different strategies in that early implementation list are either in process already or ongoing actions. They're either planned to begin within the next couple of years, or they will soon be required by state law. So again, that's roughly half of the activities in that early implementation list that are probably well underway or planned to be shortly. These, I think all of you received a packet of those early implementation strategies. I should point out that those ones that I just mentioned, the 25, those are included, they're called out as being in process or ongoing requirements or planned within 2 years. So those are the last 3 and 4 pages, 3 and 4 of that document. Those are called out separately. So with that, we have an opportunity now to shift focus to 30 different strategies of the 55 if we choose to do so. Before I do that, let me go ahead and take another quick break. We'll just check in. Any questions on the materials just presented?
Would you just go back for a second, Heather, on the ones that are in process? You said are on pages 3 and 4.
Yes, so in that early implementation list, those actually start on page 3, middle of the page, you'll see in process or ongoing actions.
So you go on pages 3, 4, then I notice at the bottom of 4 is the already planned for initiation within 2 years. How do those fit?
Correct, yeah, that's part of that 25. So those are already, we're already anticipating that those will be acted upon.
And on page 5 are the current or pending state requirements. Are those part of that as well?
Indeed, yes.
So 3, 4, 5 is where we're looking at. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. And we can find those then, or the public can in the plan so they can see what the kind of beefed up version of each of these looks like. Is that how this best way to look at these?
Well, these are the complete statements. I think we posted, correct me,
Okay.
Patricia, I think these were posted, the short list of 55 is also on the website, so folks can review.
Okay. So we should focus our attention on pages 1, 2, and top of 3. Is that what you're, or 2 and top of 3? How do you want us to?
Yeah, I think that is what we're suggesting, one of our suggestions today, yes.
Okay. Councilor Hoy?
Thanks. So Heather, on page 4, for example, FD04 says allow and support production of plant-based food on private property. So that's, I mean, can you talk about that one a little bit? I mean, it seems like that's something that we allow. I mean, it's not like that's regulated. What's that? Well, tell me more about this strategy. What's the goal, or what? I just am not quite following what that one's about.
Which one is it, Chris? Which
FD4, it says allow and support production of plant-based food on private property. I would take that as allow gardens, which we do. So I'm confused. Can you just say more about that one and what we're trying to get to there?
I see Patricia unmuted. I hope she has a bit more background on why that's in here.
Sure. So that was addressed because people expressed concern that they were not able to necessarily grow food that they could then trade with their neighbors, or to set up like a farm, a little farm, not for lack of a better term, farm stand, for instance, that there might be some regulations that didn't allow that. And so people were interested in making sure that the code was flexible enough to allow things like that.
Thank you.
So this would be the sale of your garden products or barter of garden products with whoever stops by.
Yeah, potentially.
What'd you find? Do we allow that?
I think that there was some restriction about being able to do that. And so that's why we included that as something that
Okay.
might need a code tweak.
Okay. Okay, because I thought we had, what about eggs, plant-based, but we also have eggs and honey and some other products. Is that?
I think that that's also what people were interested in having, so
Okay.
maybe more of like even a smaller, rather than a farmer's market, a really neighborhood-based type of,
Front yard
Share.
based, it sounds like you're talking about.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Great.
Any others?
Well,
Okay.
the one I think that catches my attention on these first couple, is that what you're kind of asking us, Heather? Am I catching it? Or should I wait?
I'm sorry, I didn't get your question.
Do you want us to, on these first couple of pages, are you going to take us through these, or how are we going to?
I see.
I'm
Yeah.
interested in, I mean, do we need to talk about parking or, some of these other strategies that may take time, but kind of what's going on?
Thank you. Yeah, we thought about walking through these. We weren't planning to do that today.
Okay.
I'm almost through my slides. We do
Okay.
have a short list of 6 that we're hoping to speak to as maybe a starting point.
Okay, sorry, never mind then.
No, that's good. Okay, so moving forward, so as we start looking to these 30 and maybe even the shorter list, we thought it would be important to quickly just point out some of the factors that we might need to take into consideration as we start looking at implementing these individual strategies. These include potentially additional staff time or reallocation of staff time. They do include potential revisions to Salem Revised Code, which, depending on which chapter, can get pretty complex quickly, as I've just recently learned, and for certainly include a fair amount of time. Some of these strategies will require additional analyses or consultant assistance before moving forward. A number of the strategies will require pretty robust public outreach and engagement processes that might take some time to complete and work through. And then, of course, communication and coordination needs with our local partners and stakeholders, some of which Patricia mentioned earlier, will be a large part of several of these strategies. And so with that said, I thought I would just provide a couple of examples kind of on opposite spectrums of what we're looking at. These first 2, MW, materials and waste, number 4 and 5. Those again are pulled from that early implementation list. These look to be some of the simpler strategies to potentially move forward. This is not the entire text of the strategy. It was shortened for brevity here on the slide. But essentially, we're looking to update our existing purchasing policy and specifications for the city. In talking with purchasing staff, it sounds like they're well aware of the interest to move forward with this. We actually have a few different examples from other jurisdictions. Locally, I think Eugene was one of them. So we have some examples. We know that there's interest. It's really just going to be a little bit of staff time to work through and edit and update. And then my understanding is that something like these documents can then be simply approved by the city manager. And then we can move forward. So these might be a pretty simple option to just check away initially.
Yeah.
And then we'll go to another kind of the other spectrum, as I mentioned. So TL, transportation and land use, number 24. This is second on the list of those recommended strategies that you have. This is charging for city-controlled parking, starting with streets, primarily in the downtown business area. So I think there has been some interest expressed from Downtown Business Association in this interest in moving forward. But in chatting with staff, urban development, it sounds like this is one of those examples where we would really need direction from probably this committee to move forward, as it will take a fair amount of staff time. So staff will shift gears. There are additional analyses that needs to be completed before we move forward. There will be several code revisions, plenty of public outreach and stakeholder communications. So this is something that will likely take, and that's kind of a high level look, not getting into the details of each one of those steps. So this is something where clear direction, I think, from this committee will really be critical and helpful to the process.
Yeah. So how would you like to have that direction come, or do you need it today, or what is your thought?
I think so. After we're almost wrapping up this part of the discussion today, I think it'd be nice to have the committee kind of discuss your thoughts on how best, what might be the most efficient approach to move forward, and then we'll go from there. I don't think we certainly need any kind of decision today. If folks are ready to, then I think what we would do is likely have staff from urban development come in maybe at our next meeting and talk through a bit more some of these detailed steps. But yeah, I think that's kind of up for discussion yet.
Okay.
And so then, yeah, please.
Jose.
Oh, I don't know if it's for the TO24, would that remove the small business paid parking tax? The downtown tax, there's a downtown tax. Would that replace it? Is that?
I'll jump in. Yeah, I'll jump.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can address that one, Heather. It would. So there would likely be a 1-year overlap as we were doing the installation and making the paid system operational, and then we would phase out the parking tax.
We've got a lot of substantial work we did on this, 6-7 years ago. Mayor Peterson put together a committee that went into enormous detail on this. I hope some of that can be retrieved from the archives, because it was just real interesting. I think the one that I see there that becomes really problematic is the public outreach, reaction, and preparation for this, getting a real sense of moving forward. But I think it's one you start as soon as you can, just because of the amount of work it's going to take to pull it together and do the outreach necessary to get it to council with any kind of understanding of what's going on there.
We have that information. We keep dusting it off. Yeah. And there is a timing piece to this. Following the November election, I think would be the ideal time to start moving forward with outreach and implementation.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know, what did anyone else think?
I'm in favor of moving forward with the parking. I mean, it seems like there's more buy-in now too. I'm seeing a lot more hearing communication directly in person from people who've been involved in the downtown, as well as community members who care a great deal about Salem, thinking that this seems like a no-brainer. I'm sure there are people that have a contrarian view, but I'm hearing a lot of support.
Yeah.
I tend to agree with Trevor, but I also am hearing Kristen, and I think we need to be sure that we're strategic in our thought, in anything we do moving forward, and we don't want to undermine other efforts, So we just want to be strategic about that and maybe talk a little bit more before we decide where to go. Personally, I would like, and I think Heather, you're probably going to talk more about this, but I think it would be helpful to take this list of recommended strategies and just have, like you talked about, having urban development come in or whoever it was, and just kind of give us a little bit more background, because we don't have the benefit, or some of us don't have the benefit of that earlier conversation that went into developing these. Mm-hmm. So just like, for instance, that simple one on allowing food, in my mind, that was really simple. But then as you talked more, I'm like, oh, okay, there are things that we are doing that actually do impede that some. So it just would be helpful to hear a few paragraphs or about each one of these, so we really kind of understand what the thought was in it, and then what are the things that we have to do, what are the barriers to it already happening, that sort of thing, just so we get, it's kind of difficult to make a priority list just out of these words, right, without having a little bit more context.
So Chris, are you saying then have some staff come in on each of these 6 and kind of get us briefed up so that we can actually at the next meeting like the one where, change city controlled, not parking, but telecommuting, implementing telecommuting. We'll kind of find out what's going on there and we can actually start moving these forward.
Absolutely. I'm ready. I'm ready to take action. I just want to make sure that we have a little bit of
Yeah.
context before we actually, decide. And we have I think staff did a great job giving us the recommendations. We just need to hear a little bit more in order to, and I say we get briefed up and then we start moving some of these right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see any
Okay.
reason to wait.
Well, then why don't we, if there's no objection, that would be part of our instruction then to staff is to bring these to our next meeting, ready to go, to be briefed up on them, have anyone you think ought to be here to answer any questions. You're certainly welcome to call any of us and say what kind of questions do you think you'll have in case you have any questions on who to bring. And we can start moving these forward and determining. I think the other thing that's very helpful, I know you'll do it, but I want to just mention it, is a recommended action is very important. Do you need this to go to council, to the manager? Where do you want where should these go? So that we can make the right decision and not impede it by sending them to the wrong, sending them to council and they really don't belong there. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great to me. And then having other folks come in, that's certainly going to be beneficial to me as well, as I've just recently stepped in. So
Sure.
yeah.
Okay.
So, Mayor, on that last slide where we had 6 things that were kind of up for discussion, I appreciate that they may be more complicated than they seem, but am I wrong in staff's, I get the sense that staff said these are the 6 to do soonest of the 183. We've narrowed it down to 55, 24, 25 we're going to do anyway. And then of the last, 30, these 6 is where we start. So is that correct? Is my understanding?
That's how I heard it. But
That's an option if folks are interested, I think, in some of these other strategies that aren't, I think we are looking at those 30, right, that are not underway or soon to be or required by the state. So I think if there's others that are of interest, let us know. We took a stab at 6 as a place to start.
Okay, now, so I guess that's generates my follow-up question, which is 6 all that we have bandwidth for, or can we do more? And at what point do we start asking about, what's the next 2 or 3 steps that give us the biggest bang for the buck, that are feasible, and need to be started sooner rather than later?
It's a great question. I think it depends on which strategy we're looking at. Each one, again, is going to be pretty different in what the needs are. So if we're looking at several, like the purchasing ones that I mentioned, we could knock out a few similar.
yeah.
But yeah, so it's really going to depend.
Well, I think on the bandwidth, I think it's what can we move forward on? I mean, we're looking to your judgment. The capacity of the organization better than we do, and help us as we're able to move these things along, which is what I think you've done here, but help us get them moving as fast as we can, where there's capacity in the organization and it strategically makes sense. I think, as Chris described, kind of the strategic considerations, that it makes sense to keep moving forward. But and it may be 6 today and 4 tomorrow. I don't know, but you help us through this, I think, is what we're asking in that way. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, that goes right along in line with what I was thinking. I think we take staff recommendation and just start working through that list, develop priorities for them. And then I think this group's job is to put that into a document, say, okay, here's our first, how many ever it is, 24 or whatever the number is, things that we think ought to get done. And it essentially becomes the actual plan, the implementation plan of the strategies that have already been put together. So and then it doesn't mean that all those are going to start the minute we write that plan, but they'll be ready to go as staff can get to them and staff can process, and develops the capacity. Some of them, we might do 10 of them right off the bat, but a couple of them might wait, they might wait a year. I mean, who knows? But this committee's work will have been completed, and we'll say, okay, here's your to-do list, go for it. And, it'll happen as it happens.
Yeah. Well, and it gives us a chance to present to council a list in an organized way, in an order that has been vetted, where we've got some sort of vetting where as it comes up, it's like, well, what about the budget? What about the staff time? What about that will be, and that gives us some time to work with you guys to develop that list in a rational way and not overwhelm the organization. Because we could. I'm watching other committees meet, and there's a lot of questions that might that we can't ask for all the research at once. And this stuff gets very complicated, and it goes outside of our general purview. We're starting to move into into other people's spaces here, and we're going to need to understand when to go in and work with them on whether it's the gas company or the electrical folks or whomever. We need to kind of understand where we are and when we ought to be moving forward on these things. So I think you can really help us through this. And I think this is a committee that you can work with to make this happen in an organized and as expeditious as possible.
That sounds great. Yeah.
Okay. You tell us when it stops working, okay, Heather? Somebody's got to kind of put if there needs to be, a governor on this, some sort of braking system, we'll need you guys to help us with that, because often our inclination is if we can do 3, and I think Trevor was right, if we can do 3, what about 10? What can we do? Help us get that structured correctly. I think it's real important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the critical pieces will be and I think we do have the time, as you'd mentioned, maybe next meeting to bring folks in and start talking about, to really kind of dive into, I have a high level kind of look at what's needed, but the folks that will be working on it, they're going to have the details, and they're going to have more information that will kind of help flesh out exactly what is going to be needed for each one and whether or not we do move. So we'll plan to do that as well.
Could you also bring in anyone with specialized expertise that is not staff? I mean, and I don't know if any of these are in that list, but if we need somebody to hear from that's outside of our organization, can you at least identify them or bring them in if they want to come talk to us? Chris, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I think it would be helpful also if we could just have like a mini implementation plan on each one of these. I mean, I'm not talking about a big plan. I'm talking about bullet points. Like, okay, so we need to rewrite code. We need to, or we have a policy that needs to be rewritten, or there's a law change, or there needs to be a community conversation. Like, what are the 3 or 4 or 5 things to implement this thing? Just and you could just go down the list and what's it going to take to implement every one of them? Because ultimately that's what we're going to need in order to actually get these things done. But I think it's helpful for us as the elected folks to understand the real world
Implications.
Implications. I'm like, what's that word? Implications of our.
There's no magic wand for any of these.
Right. So people can understand, like, okay, well, this one has 16 things there, and 2 of them are pretty huge, So I just think it's important to have just like a very small, concise implementation plan on each one of these. And so then we can understand, hey, why isn't this one happening? Oh yeah, because it's got 16 steps and it was priority number 4. So, and because I think council is going to really want to be able to start being able to show progress on this thing. And that'll give us a real systematic way to show those things, like, hey, we got these in process, these are up next, this is the barriers to these, so we can really show the community what we're up to.
Yeah, I think that last, whatever the pages are, 3, 4, and 5, where things are actually happening, I think having that called out is going to be very helpful to let the public know that we've got, because that 183 or whatever the number is sounds daunting, but you're showing us really kind of half the list here is either done, underway, seriously contemplated, or being decided by somebody beyond our beyond us, whether it's state or federal or whatever. And I think it's getting that sort of, that there is quite a bit of action. I think what you say, I can't remember how many you mentioned, but it was really a substantial number.
Nearly half.
already going.
Right.
Yeah. I think that ought to come out as quickly as we can get it. So we can point this out, because people are going to be like, well, God, you got 183 and you just moved on 6. No, we've got way less than that, and we're moving our way through them. But some of them we've already done, or there's already a pathway underway. I think that'd be very helpful.
Mr. Mayor, if I could please. Robert Chandler, Assistant Director of Public Works, your comment about bringing in people outside of staff who have the expertise, there is a modest budget attached to this program for next fiscal year where we can bring in people when the subject matter expertise required exceeds that of our staff. We can bring some in, and as we approach implementation, where we actually might need to bring in consultants or others in the trade craft, so we can get a good, well-informed implementation plan for some of these different things. So we do have some resources for that.
Great. Well, it's not just the one, it's ones without an iron in the,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's getting some using some capacity out there that can at least give us a sense that the bias has been set aside on either side of the issue, and we're getting a real factual statement. I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I have a comment, Mayor, on this topic? So I agree, we should definitely get the experts involved, and people that don't have a financial bias would be delightful to hear from. But I do think at some point we'll need to interface directly, maybe not in this committee, but maybe this committee with Northwest Natural, PGE, Chariots.
Oh, you will.
Yeah, good. So we get experts without a financial bias as well as them. And then, I know that I met with a representative from Environment Oregon, and I think Councillor Lewis did before he stepped away. They were the group that worked with PGE and the state legislation to get the PGE to agree to their reduction, to their plan to reduce by like 80% by 2040. So they've looked at this, like what cities are going to do this year. And they wanted to focus on transportation, which is the largest sector-based thing that we're looking at. On the CO2 audit the city did, it was 53%, and just accelerating the adoption of electric vehicles. So again, they put time into this. They've got resources. They've thought about it. So I personally would find it beneficial to interface with them. But that's just one that I'm aware of. I'm not opposed to others. I do like that framework, that it is the biggest chunk of the CO2, pie that we're looking at. So anything we can do to bring that down seems like there's going to be the opportunity for, the biggest bang for the buck.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
Okay, well, I just had a couple more slides. Maybe I wrap that up.
Right.
I think we've had some of the discussion we were anticipating, so this is great.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, where was I? So back to that short list. Oops, pardon me. Okay, so as one option here, as we move forward, and I think as stated, we can certainly bring folks in to talk more. But these were just our first stab at starting to pull through those 30 new activities. Again, those first 2 I think will be relatively simple. We can certainly get more feedback from purchasing if we need to. We can start talking about the city-controlled parking, paying for parking. In addition, we have a few others that we hadn't yet touched on. TL 34 to implement a telecommuting or flexible work schedule for city employees. Implement a city policy that transitions city-owned vehicles to all electric. Obviously something that will take some time, but folks are already starting to talk about. And then lastly, to begin reporting community greenhouse gas emissions on a regular basis. Our last data was from 2016. We did the report in 2019. That is something that's recommended that we complete actually every 4 years. So we've already started to we've got a couple different estimates of what that looks like. There's certain platforms and guidelines that we'll need to follow to do that, a number of different ways to do it and approaches. So that's something that we can start looking at quickly. And that was the slides that we had today. And then we were planning to go into discussion on goals and expectations, and we've already started that. Before I do end, I guess I can end the slide show. I did want to point one more thing out before I forget. We've learned that just within the last few months, other opportunities are going to arise. We've had a grant opportunity come our way from the Oregon Department of Energy, opened up this spring. It's for community renewable energy projects, up to $1 million, no match required. So that was brought to our attention, and it's prompted staff to start looking at, well, what might be a viable project for that grant. And so I think we found a potential project that will be headed to City Council at the May 23rd City Council meeting. So, and that's something that would hit on a couple different strategies that we haven't even touched on today, not even in that list of 55. So I think it would be wise as we move forward to think that additional opportunities might come our way, and staff might jump and pivot a little bit to jump on those. So
great. And I think just keeping us, the council and the public informed of your taking advantage of these opportunities is just real positive. Those are very positive developments when that kind of thing occurs. So I hope what it can do is help us get through this as rapidly as we can over the next, presumably the next year or two.
okay.
Just a couple comments again.
Yeah.
Mayor. So the 6 that you guys have picked, seeing the slide again, I'm impressed. Like you picked good 6 things to start with. So thank you. I mean, that just kind of proof to me that you're really, thinking about this. I'm starting to look ahead and figure out, like, if we can do a couple more, which ones do we do? They're certainly hard to choose. There's so many good ones, which is also good that you've whittled down, the top 55 to the correct ones to be considering. I do have a comment on EC07 on page 2 of the 5-page document on strategies. EC07 is a great one, but I'm curious. It feels to me like I served on the finance committee last year. It feels like we've done some of this. Like, I know our short-term holdings in terms of investing as a city, as we're allowed to, we no longer invest in fossil fuels. We changed that. So is that still not addressed? Like, my understanding, based on what I was explained, is it starting in the page 3 is things that we're implementing or will implement. And so I'm just curious, is EC07 something that's actually started? Because we as a city have divested from fossil fuels. And there's a second part of EC07, which has to do with like employee contributions and retirement package. So it's not done. But as a city, the city holdings have divested. So or is this all, like, am I misreading this? Because it feels like we've started this a little bit.
Yeah, so I can certainly, let me read this out loud briefly. Conduct a review of city financial assets, investments to determine extent of holdings in fossil fuel companies. The second piece on that is, based on review, divest from fossil fuel holdings and provide options to employees for alternative investment strategies in climate-friendly financial portfolios. I would defer to other staff if they have an update on that, please.
We actually took a vote recently at City Council and changed that policy to actually implement that. So I almost think this one's in progress.
Yeah, that's my point. I think it's like mostly in progress, if not done. There's just the last sentence implies that maybe we give employees a chance to not invest in fossil fuels too. And I don't know anything about that. That's more HR.
Maybe we could get Josh to give us.
Well, if I can jump in, because I'm on the fiduciary committee
there you go.
For the retirement accounts, and employees already have that opportunity. As part of our program, there is a brokerage window that they can do, that employees can go in and invest in anything that they like. we have to be careful. Just as a quick aside, the federal government requires that we provide investment vehicles that are safe. That's why most 401k plans are extremely vanilla because the federal government requires it, or we as an employer could be held liable. But one of the things that our advisors did for us when we switched to Voya Financial, who we use as our recording agent, they recommended this investment window. So if employees want to invest in green energy, they have the opportunity to do that beyond our plain vanilla funds that we already have.
Yeah. If we want to go much further, we may want to have someone come in and take us through ERISA and kind of what's going on there in terms of these fiduciary responsibilities and employee rights. And if you want to, Trevor, we could see if we're up against any.
Yeah, I don't know that, I don't think the ERISA stuff is low hanging fruit. So it feels like the city as investing in short-term investments, that's done. We've already.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, but okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, Chris.
So this kind of goes back to my point. I think we just need a little action plan on each one of these. And this one might say, well, these 3 things are done, but we still have one more thing to go. So I just think we just need an assessment on each one of these, because I'm sure it varies no matter which one of these you read on what we've done or haven't done. And so that's the kind of work that we're going to find out. I think as staff creates those and then presents, and we could say, oh, well, let's hear from Josh because we want to know more about that. If that's not completely done yet, what are the barriers to getting it done? So I think this conversation is one we have to have on every one of these.
Yeah, I would though, because it's been called out. If it's not a big lift for Josh, let's make it 7 and let's find out what's going on in this one. I mean, I think
that's fine too.
Sure. Time. Let's just pull this one up and we'll ask for 7. I think that's, if that's one we want to get a look at. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Is there anything else then we need to discuss? Do you feel like, I guess, we've got the right approach, that this will be kind of the way we'll move ahead? I think we'd be very sensitive to what Councilor Hoy was suggesting, which is, as you can beef these up a little bit, feel free, without us instructing. I mean, if there's stuff that can be pulled in here, just knowing that you've got this much, I've just got to believe there's more. And to the extent that we can have a little more information and update this list with additional information, that'd be great. It'll help speed up our process of getting these issues onto the table, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay,
Sounds
so
good.
when's our next meeting?
Oh, goodness, June. Let me look at the date. June 6th at 10 a.m. And I think most of the meetings moving forward are on Monday,
At 10 a.m.
10 a.m.
6th. Just for a second, we don't have one of these city manager things coming up on June 6th. I don't know why that pops into my head. We don't, do we? Nope.
No, it looks like it's going to be June 1st and then around June 14th or 15th.
Okay, great. Good.
And the link for that meeting is broken. That's in the calendar. So I will be deleting that link and sending you a new meeting notice.
Okay, very good. We'll all watch for it. Yes, Trevor.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to guarantee that I'll be able to do these, but my schedule may make this difficult. So I may need Virginia to fill in or just finish this out. Let me see what things really start to look like now that I'm off my sabbatical and back in work. But I don't know if I'm going to be able to attend all of these.
Okay. Well, let me know if you're not going to be able to. Because I'll need to appoint, besides Virginia, I still need to add somebody else to have a backup. But we still need to make sure we've got people. So,
Okay, yeah, I'll let you know.
okay. Very good. Okay, if there's no objection, then we'll adjourn.